Hello and welcome to Proposed Sarasota 2050 Changes, a Community Status and Impact Report. I'm Kathy Antunes, the Vice President of CONA, and I prepared this report along with Lourdes Ramirez, the President of CONA. CONA is a coalition of over 70 neighborhoods, condo, homeowner associations, and civic associations. We're dedicated to promoting neighborhood interests in Sarasota County. The underlying issue with 2050 is sprawl. Sprawl is the failure to maximize existing infrastructure. Our schools, roads, police, fire department, water, sewer, all of the services that our taxes pay for. The premature development of rural land before our infrastructure is maximized wastes tax dollars and squanders resources. It's important to have some background on the 2050 plan with regard to the urban service boundary. The urban service boundary was established in Sarasota County in 1997. People were concerned about disappearing farmland and sprawl development. To the west of the urban service boundary, basically I-75, we have our urban service area, and this is where our infrastructure is concentrated. The 2050 plan is a 73-page optional overlay district. It's one part of the county comprehensive plan, and it was developed in response to concerns of landowners east of I-75 who wanted to develop their land at higher densities. The 2050 plan permits major increases in density outside the urban service boundary, conditional on protections of the financial and environmental interests of existing residents in Sarasota through three mechanisms: fiscal neutrality, open space requirements, and mixed-use design requirements. So let's take a look at what the same 3,000-acre parcel of land outside the urban service boundary east of I-75, how it could be developed under the existing rural or open estate zoning versus the 2050 optional overlay zoning. So with 3,000 acres, the density allowed, depending on the zoning, is one dwelling for every 5, 10, or 160 acres. That brings the total housing units at build-out to a range from 18 to 600 dwellings. Under the 2050 overlay plan, a developer can opt to go with a much higher density, 5 units per acre, bringing the total housing units at build-out to 15,000 units. That represents a density increase from 2,500 to 83,000%. And we'd ask you to think for a minute and consider the huge impact on the profitability of the land that the optional 2050 plan confers. Also included in 2050 is an affordable housing bonus. If a developer includes affordable housing, they're allowed an additional unit per acre, bringing the total density up to 6 units per acre. And that represents a density increase of 3,000 to 100,000%. For example, the first 2050 village approved, the villages of Lakewood Ranch South, was originally zoned, or under the rural zoning is zoned, for 50 units, but that became over 5,000 units when they opted for the 2050 plan, bringing the density increase to over 10,000%. So to recap, in 2006, Sarasota County, with agreement and collaboration from the development industry, approved Sarasota 2050, which conferred 2,500 to 100,000% increases in density, and also requires environmental protections, fiscal neutrality, and mixed-use design. Here's a schematic directly from the 2050 plan documenting what the mixed-use design or village concept looks like. It requires a mixed-use walkable community where the commercial is within, not on the perimeter, not like strip malls, trying to get away from that design. And it keeps wildlife corridors, intact wetlands, and lots of parks and open space. Proposed changes to 2050 include zoning and policy that is amended to allow for even greater increases in density, more active uses in open space, such as tennis courts, reducing percentages of open space, smaller buffer areas, the use of stormwater ponds to count as open space, and moving commercial from the village center to the outskirts. Also included in proposed changes to 2050 are changes to fiscal neutrality. Currently, in the 2050 plan, fiscal neutrality requires that this new development pays for all of its infrastructure. The roads, schools, police, fire, sewer that we've discussed. And when you think about it, because the 2050 plan basically is allowing a breach of the urban service boundary, it makes sense that the requirement is the excess services are paid for by the developer. The developer is also required to submit an annual or semi-annual report documenting that their infrastructure obligation costs are being met. The proposed change for the 2050 plan includes having existing county taxpayers pay for some or all of the infrastructure needs for new housing developments. And the change includes no reporting. The developers want to pay at will. We describe this or compare this to telling the IRS, I'm going to pay my taxes, I just don't want to file. A recent released $90,000 consultant report that was contracted by Sarasota County makes some very extreme and somewhat outlandish recommendations about changing the 2050 plan and fiscal neutrality. This draft report, consultant report, recommends eliminating the urban service boundary, eliminating density limits throughout the county, eliminating fiscal neutrality entirely, and basically getting rid of zoning codes. CONA opposed the hiring of this consultant from the beginning. This consultant is considered quite controversial, and we believe this was a complete waste of $90,000. So where are we with future growth management? This is data from the County Planning Office taking a look at total potential new housing units in the unincorporated areas of Sarasota County. If you take a look inside the urban service boundary, the total potential new housing units is listed as 34,700 units. And then outside the urban service boundary, we're just over 10,000 units, bringing the total to about 45,000 units. The total projected 10-year demand for housing units is 15,300. So essentially, this data in aggregate shows that the supply of potential housing units available is about 300% of projected demand. What's very important to note here are the grayed out, the dark gray areas that are not included in the county's data. These include the municipalities of Longboat Key, the city of Sarasota, the city of Venice, and the city of Northport. Northport alone, when we called them, they have over 70,000 total potential new housing units platted. So if you include the municipalities, which if we're going to be using useful information, it's imperative to do, the county's available potential housing supply, where we already have infrastructure within the urban service boundary and our municipalities, is much, much higher than our projected 10-year demand. So what do we propose? CONA supports infill and redevelopment. Infill development, or recycling land close to the city's core, costs about 1/3 for infrastructure because there's no need to extend roads and sewer and water lines. They're already there. Keeping closer to downtown reduces trips for police, firefighters, and ambulances, saving taxpayers 10% on ongoing costs. And mixed-use projects generate 10 times more tax revenue per acre than cookie-cutter housing tracts. Chuck Marohn is the author of Thoughts on Building Strong Towns, and he talks about how our growth pattern of development is not serving our financial interests. He writes, "Our places do not create wealth, they destroy wealth. Our development pattern creates modest short-term benefits and massive long-term costs." What Marohn is talking about here are the long-term infrastructure maintenance costs that really aren't factored in when we are considering what kind of development we're supporting and how we're going to be moving forward as a community together. And if you think about 41 and all of the empty lots and empty commercial centers, it's apparent that our county has a long way to go when it comes to an effective infill policy, and we already have existing infrastructure that we need to use. So let's take a look at the real estate market and how it's changing. This is information from Atlanta, Georgia, that real estate market, comparing the walkable urban product, the real estate in walkable communities, versus real estate in drivable suburban communities. The author of this study is Christopher Lineberger. He's a professor at the GW University School of Business, and this was published in the Atlantic Cities on October 2nd of 2013. What you can see, whether you're looking at office, retail, rental housing, for sale housing, or the overall marketplace in Atlanta, Georgia, which is considered the Mac Daddy of sprawl, the walkable urban product fetches a lot more per square foot across all of the parameters, all different arenas in real estate. And Lieberger notes the fact that people are willing to pay so much more and that landlords can charge such a premium for a store or home in a denser neighborhood suggests demand is shifting direction and that there's not enough supply of walkable development to go around. Lineberger says that we're sputtering along at 2% growth precisely because we're not building enough of the walkable urban product that the market wants. And it's signaling with pretty flashing lights, he says, to build more of this stuff. So let's take a look at different types of development in Sarasota County and the annual tax yield per acre. In order for a community to be sustainable and its budgets to balance over time, it's important that the type of development we invest in be able to meet its infrastructure needs and costs, maintenance costs. This study has garnered national attention, and it was put together by a group called Public Interest Projects. The authors are Joe Mincozy and Peter Katz, and Peter Katz worked in Sarasota County's planning department. As you can see, county residential real estate brings in about $3,600 in annual tax yield per acre, compared to city residential at $8,200 in annual tax yield per acre. The yield from a Walmart, very interestingly, is not much better than a single family home in the city of Sarasota. Walmart's annual tax yield is $8,300 or about $8,400 per acre. And this is of interest to residents in the city of Sarasota because we recently had a controversy over whether a Walmart was consistent with our zoning in the city. But its supporters, one of the things they said was that a Walmart would bring in a lot of tax revenue and cover our unfunded pension liability. And you can see here that is a myth. Walmart does not contribute much more than single-family housing to our tax base. But if you jump down now to number 9, the urban mixed-use low-rise, and residents of Sarasota County will recognize Palm Avenue is the picture number 9, the shops on Palm Avenue. These aren't very tall buildings, but they yield over $90,000 in annual tax yield per acre. If you look at the urban mixed-use low-rise, or mid-rise, which is number 10, the Orange Blossom building, there you take another huge jump up to about $800,000 in annual tax yield per acre. And across from the Orange Blossom building is 1315 Main, number 11. The urban mixed-use high-rise is $1.2 million per acre in tax yield. And that is not including the commercial on the bottom of 1350 Main. So what's important to note here is that these structures bring in a lot more tax revenue and contribute to the tax base and that their residents are probably contributing more to our services than they are actually using. Minkosi says that when one does the math on those infrastructure costs against the tax revenues we were seeing in Sarasota County, it took a suburban multifamily housing development 42 years to pay off its infrastructure, while a mixed-use downtown tower, calculated for its residential portions only, was paying off its infrastructure costs in 3 years. And this is very important because that 42-year payment cycle is longer than the actual life of the infrastructure. So it's critical that we get the right development mix in place so that we are maintaining our existing infrastructure. And this is important for the city of Sarasota. So we put policies in place that do not undermine the city, but it's also important that the design standards of 2050 remain intact because that mixed-use design helps create a sustainable tax base. So what about the city of Sarasota? There are a number of policies and objectives under Sarasota 2050 that have not been implemented. Objective US 3, or Urban Suburban 3, is to encourage infill development within the urban service area. Policy US 3.1 requires an expedited staff review and scheduling of rezoning and development review process within 2 years of the effective date of the Sarasota 2050 RMA1 Comprehensive Plan Amendment. This did not happen. The county has not implemented an effective and streamlined infill policy. Objective US 5 is to strengthen intergovernmental planning efforts. And Policy US 5.1 calls for a county municipal coordinated planning program. The county shall create and coordinate with its municipalities a planning alliance in order to more fully and comprehensively preserve and strengthen existing communities. This planning program has never been implemented, and if you'll recall the map showing the total potential housing units in Sarasota County, the county is not incorporating the municipality data of its housing unit supply into its maps. And so this is a glaring omission and something that the county and cities need to work together to make happen. So who is collaborating on 2050 changes? Well, the county has had 10 documented 2050 meetings of county staff with private sector developers that took place between September of 2012 and January of 2013. The firms that were included in those meetings are Schrader Manatee Ranch, Neal Communities, Rod Krebs, John Cannon Homes, High Hat Ranch, and Palmer Ranch. On September 25th of this year, the County Commission discussed their collaboration with the cities at the behest of a request by City Commissioner Suzanne Atwell, who wanted to know what was going on with 2050 and how it would impact the city of Sarasota. During that discussion, the County Commission said that city commissioners can attend workshops, and one county commissioner said, "We've had workshops for the past couple of years. There's been a lot of stuff going on." Well, what has been going on? The opening of 2050 was implemented on January 30th of 2013. That's when the County Commission voted to open the plan for revision. That was at the time of the Commission's discussion 9 months ago. It was not 2 years ago. There have been 2 open houses at Twin Lakes Park that took place in March of 2013. And an open house is basically, hello, how are you? Here's a pamphlet. Do you have a question? An open house is not a substantive meeting, and it's certainly not a workshop. The very first workshop held on 2050 took place on October 7th during a city commission meeting. City commissioners couldn't be there, and city residents had their city commission meeting to attend. So obviously, it is false to say that there had been any workshops for the past couple of years. That statement was simply not true. The reality is there have been no dedicated 2050 planning meetings with any of the city commissions. What is at risk for city residents? Urban sprawl and job sprawl, increased taxes and reduced services. We need to recognize the long-term consequences of continuing to add surplus infrastructure and expecting existing residents to pay for it. We're essentially being asked to fund our competition as city residents. The walkability and vitality of our community is at risk, and of course, squandered resources and a sense of place. So what is needed? We need to establish the County Municipal Planning Program as per US 5 in 2050. We need to establish a robust developed infill policy under Objective US 3 in 2050. We absolutely need to keep fiscal neutrality, and city residents, dual tax city residents, and county taxpayers shouldn't be expected to foot the bill for surplus infrastructure east of I-75. We have plenty of housing capacity within the urban service boundary. We need to maintain and maximize that infrastructure. We need to take time necessary to ensure compliance with 2050 objectives. We need independent, reliable data, not ridiculous consultant reports that waste money. And we also need inclusive data. We need maps that include data from the municipalities. When Andres Dewani addressed the Sarasota Joint City and County Commission meeting on June 19th of 2013, he said, "Let the urban be urban and the rural be rural." He held up the 2050 optional overlay and he said, you may want to get rid of this because it looks like all you're doing is creating sprawl. He advocated for a streamlined, simple approach to urban infill that would make it easy for developers to develop within the city of Sarasota. And he talked about the city's checkerboard look and how we had so many empty lots that we really needed to focus on infill. He was also advocating for our rural areas remaining rural and not being in a hurry to overdevelop and suburbanize before we need to. There are implications for our agriculture industry, the ability to grow food locally. A lot of long-term interests are at stake here with potential changes to 2050. So we thank you for taking the time to review this presentation. We encourage you to pay close attention to this issue because the proposed changes to 2050 do not appear to be in the best interests of Sarasota neighborhoods and Sarasota taxpayers.